How do you think that reflects through the midstream as far as inventories are concerned? In your quarterly carrot, you talk about them still being reasonably high and probably going to stay that way until next year even. What do you think is driving that dynamic?
I think that's something that we're almost going to have to get used to. It's going to be a theme for the industry, we believe, for quite some time, and that's quite simply is that there's going to be higher levels of inventory throughout the pipeline, and it's about the industry as a whole using every part of its balance sheet, available balance sheets, to absorb that inventory and not relying on the midstream to basically become the cushion for price declines, and obviously then supporting the market as it rises as well. So, but we do think that the inventory levels are going to be a theme going forward. The two major producers obviously have taken a lot more inventory on balance sheets, and careful management of that inventory release that will ultimately dictate a lot of the performance going forward for pricing.
Let's just touch quickly on the midstream and some of the challenges we talked about last time you were here. One of those you mentioned was liquidity, and that's come up again in your report this time around. And you're saying that you still believe those challenges remain, that not much has changed from the back end of 2015.
Indeed, and I think this is something we've always said that it's going to take a long time to work its way out of the system, or at least the liquidity to return to the system. I think some interesting trends that we've noted in talking to buyers is that certain buyers that have been more active or proactive in accepting they may not make a return on certain goods that they've purchased and selling them on. And taking the loss, or at least the hit, very early in that investment cycle, they've been able to then reinvest those monies. Whilst they would have made a loss, they're back in the market and they're back, at least giving themselves a fighting chance of making a return and recovering that loss on the previous purchase. Versus a lot of buyers that have maybe been sitting on inventory where they're self-funded, they're not reliant on the banks themselves to dictate when they shouldn't buy or sell goods, and those guys, they're probably finding life harder because they realise they may make a loss if they sell the goods now, but they don't want to realise that loss because it's their own funds, and I think that's the sort of the dichotomy of the market right now, and it's going to be an interesting trend to see how that plays out over the long term. But liquidity remains an issue, and a lot of that is to do with the velocity of the turnover.
At the start of the year, we saw rough diamond demand actually being higher than people thought, and a lot of reports about that being due to a number of factors, maybe price being one of them, maybe a need to keep manufacturing facilities open because of the economics of having to close them. And I wonder whether you saw there were any specific reasons behind the increase in rough diamond demand, aside from the normal cycle of things.
Well, actually, the price, or should we say the demand recovery rather than the price recovery in the first part of the year, it's come from a multitude of factors. A lot of it has come through from pent-up demand for manufacturing, where they drove down their inventory levels. They've been able to monetize those inventory levels, giving the confidence to reinvest. We've seen the dearth of new supplies in the market, so there were certain categories that were obviously very much in demand, and what we have seen is still consumer trends. There's still a baseline demand. And what happens, that baseline demand hasn't moved, and you're still consuming goods. And then when you ultimately, the major suppliers take a huge abundance of supply out of that industry, it doesn't take long for that solid demand to pull goods out of the industry, and it doesn't take long for people to realise if they look in the safe, there isn't an awful lot in there. But they have been able to monetize those assets. So the bank balances look better. it will send people back into the market to repurchase those goods.
And I think it's interesting how, perhaps structurally the market's changed a little bit. You don't have people wanting to hold as much stock anymore. It's almost sort of just in time. They want what they want when they want it, but don't want to have to hang on to it for very long. And that's happening at retail level, and then in the midstream, maybe that's where things need to adjust.
I think that's exactly what we're starting to see. The retailers, no one gives the retailers credit for holding excess inventory. So the manufacturing side and the midstream, they're not going to do the same thing. They find that there's very little value in holding excess inventory that's sitting there not generating a return. And it's just, I think it's just a sort of maturation of the industry, which is following trends that's globally accepted, that abundant inventory levels not generating a return is unacceptable for either investors or owners of businesses. And I think that's just a trend that will go forward, and we will see more just-in-time sort of inventory management, but that will possibly lead to far higher levels of volatility in pricing.